Well, I'm in, but I've just got it. I'm in practice session, just so that I can connect it to Facebook. Yeah. All right. Uh, Excellent. Thanks, Lois. All right, Lois. You should be a panelist, but you are on mute. You are live on Facebook. You are recording.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. We're live on Facebook.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lois Penny. I'm president of the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club. The forum today will be hosted by Barry Weinberg.
Thanks, Lois. Good evening, everybody. I'm Barry Weinberg. I am the current treasurer of the West Harlem Democratic Club, and I will be moderating the New York City Forum hearing from applying for the Democratic nomination. Bill 21. It will take place upon adoption by the state, the electoral calendar, on probably the Tuesday. So the purpose of this forum is to allow those in West Harlem community, as well as members of the West Harlem Democratic Club, to hear from and get a better sense of the candidates competing for the Democratic nomination in that race. We will be hosting an endorsement meeting for the club members to decide who the club will support at the end. Tonight's forum, though, is really just so that we can have a better understanding of what candidates propose to do if they are elected comptroller, and to really educate the public about the contours of this race and what it is that the comptroller does.
Barry,
Yes.
you're breaking up.
Okay. Thank you, Lois. Many people in New York don't know what the responsibilities of the New York City Comptroller are. And the Comptroller, as the city's chief financial officer and auditor and chief investor of the city pension funds, plays a crucial but often overlooked role in how the city runs, particularly with regard to the city budget and the city pensions. Tonight, we will be hearing from Assemblymember David Weprin from Queens, Councilmember Brad Lander from Brooklyn, Senator Kevin Parker, also from Brooklyn, and Senator Brian Benjamin from Harlem, also representing the Upper West Side and East Harlem. These four candidates will be asked questions that were prepared ahead of time, as well as any questions that folks in attendance may wish to ask of them. If you want to ask a question or submit a question for the candidates, you can do so either through the live stream on Facebook by commenting it under the live stream, or if you are logged into the Zoom as an attendee, you can use the Q&A function to ask a question, and then I will do it for possibility of being asked of the candidate. So we're going to get started here in a couple of minutes with Assemblymember David Weprin. But in the meantime, if you have any questions that you would like us to ask the Comptroller candidate, feel free to begin submitting them now. I also want to encourage everyone who is attending either via Zoom or watching on Facebook to make sure that their friends and neighbors view this video after the fact if they're not able to do so now. One of the benefits of being able to do this remotely is that these will be recorded and available for folks to review as the campaign unfolds. So you can use these recordings as tools for your neighbors, your friends, your family, other voters you may know in New York City, to help educate them on what it is the New York City Comptroller does, who is running, what their backgrounds are, and who they think they would like to support. And I also want to take a moment to thank some of the people who made this day possible, including our fantastic corresponding secretary, Vanessa Lecau-Trivedi, our platform committee co-chairs, including Sean Farrow and Natalie Mineta, as well as everyone else in the club who has helped this year to really make us more of a resilient and responsive club that can do more and more programming as we grow strength and numbers. So 2020, I know, has been a very difficult year for many of us, but I think it's one where we have really laid a foundation and a groundwork so that the best is to come. I see I have one question. Okay. Got it. All right. Hopefully these headphones will help a little bit with my audio quality. All right. And we've started here in a moment with Assembly Member David Webber. I also want to take a moment to explain to folks what an endorsement from our club really means. So many people who have helped us campaign previously have carried petitions. The club's endorsement will help determine not only who we distribute literature for and talk to our neighbors about, but also whose name is on our petitions and who will be helping get on the ballot. I see that we have been joined by Assemblymember Weprin, who will be our first candidate speaking tonight. The format will be each candidate will have 5 minutes to provide some introductory remarks. We'll then walk through some questions, both questions that I have prepared as well as those submitted by the audience, and then we'll have time for some closing remarks for each candidate. Assemblymember Weprin.
Hey Barry, David is signing in. This is Greg Levine. I just wanted to make sure we were connected here. Okay,
great.
David is.
I'm going to go ahead and read them. All right. And it looks like he may have had his connection drop. Okay. I see that we've also been joined by another one of the candidates who will be speaking at about 6:55, Senator Kevin Parker. Senator, welcome.
Hey, how you doing? This is actually the Senator's Chief of Staff, Vaughn Mayers. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
right.
I'm getting the Senator joining 1 second. I'm Vaughn as Chief of Staff, by the way.
Great. Thanks so much for coming, Vaughn.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right. And we're back. Okay, Assembly Member, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. Gonna rename you again then. Welcome to the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club's Comptroller Candidates Forum. I'm Barry Weinberg. I'm our treasurer, and I don't know if you heard, but we will be going through 5 minutes of introductory remarks, and then we'll have some questions for about another a little under 10 minutes, and then we'll have a closing, so you'll be wrapped up by 6:50, 6:55.
Okay, thank you. Sounds good.
Great, welcome. Go ahead and jump in.
Good. Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm aware of your history of progressive politics and being strong advocates in your community and really citywide and statewide for that matter. I share your progressive values. I'm very proud of my progressive record. I currently chair the Corrections Committee in the Assembly, and I'm very proud of all the criminal justice reform legislation we have done in the 4 or 5 years that I've been correction chair. Prior to that, I was chair of a committee on people with disabilities and was a strong advocate for the disability community as well. I think we're going to be in some very tough financial times for years to come. And I think my resume is well suited to help bring us out of that. Just to give you a little bit of my background, as I mentioned, I've served in the Assembly for the last 11 years as chair of the Corrections Committee for the last 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, I was in the City Council from 2002 through 2009, where I chaired the Finance Committee of the City Council for all of those 8 years. We balanced 8 budgets on time. We had some very tough fiscal times back then. We had post 9/11, we had a multi-billion-dollar deficit. We turned that into a surplus. And then in 2008, we had an economic recession and we had a couple of $billion-dollar deficit that we also turned into a surplus. So, I'm very proud of that record. I also served under Governor Mario Cuomo as Deputy Superintendent of Banking for the state. And during that time, I'm very proud of some of the consumer-oriented regulations that we enacted under my watch. One in particular I was very involved in as Secretary of the Banking Board was to require banks not to make money off of the float of consumers, where we required banks to clear checks within a limited period of time. In the case of out-of-state checks, they had to clear within a week. It used to take 2 to 3 weeks. In the case of in-state checks, they have to clear within 3 days. And in the case of government checks that we know the money is there, they have to clear the same day. So I'm proud of those consumer regulations. I also have had a 25-year municipal finance career on Wall Street. And during that time, I floated bond issues and put together bond issues for hospitals and schools. And I'm proud of that record too. So I really feel that my background is very well suited for the office of New York City Comptroller. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction. One question that we'll be asking everyone reflects the really grave fiscal landscape for both the city and the state, and then the city again if state funds don't make it to the city. Tax revenues are down due to the pandemic. We continue to have increased expenditures in certain areas due to unforeseen costs. Whoever takes office as New York City Comptroller on January 1st will face a very different landscape than the current Comptroller has had to face over the past 8 years. What is your understanding of the New York Budget Justice Campaign, and do you support it? And then in your current position as Assembly Member, what are you doing to make New York's revenue system more equitable now?
Well, are you referring to a millionaire's tax as part of that agenda? I do I do support a millionaire's tax and a higher one for billionaires and different, grading. There's no question that people that are the wealthiest New Yorkers need to pay more and can afford to pay more. I'd also like to see some other revenue streams. I'm not sure I know exactly all the projections. We have a lot of things we have to do. We can't, totally tax our way out of this, but it's certainly a piece of this for additional revenue. And certainly we should start with the high end, but I think we also have to create new revenue streams of taxes. For example, New Jersey is getting significant taxes on app-based sports betting. We've legalized sports betting in New York State, and New Jersey allows for app betting on sporting events. I have a bill with Senator Joe Adabo, who's head of the Racing and Wagering Committee in the Senate, to allow app-based sports betting. And I would like to see New York City get a significant piece of that revenue, especially when you're talking about people that live in the city that are betting through an app. I also support legalizing marijuana. I think that's going to happen very soon. Clearly, there's a referendum in New Jersey. It's going to happen in New Jersey. There's a lot of tax revenue for both the city and state that should be with that. And I think we have to obviously benefit some of the communities that have disproportionately been impacted by that. We have to have expungement of prior convictions, whether they be misdemeanors or felonies for those that were involved in marijuana convictions. But I think there's a huge tax revenue piece that we can get for New York City and New York State out of that.
Great. So as some context, the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club was one of the first clubs to sign on to the Budget Justice Campaign, calling for a more equitable and just taxation and community investment system in New York to raise taxes on the wealthy and highest income, and to also provide property tax relief for low income and working class people all over New York State who've been hit hard. One or two other proposals that have been floated include a tax on second homes over a certain valuation, which is commonly referred to as the pied-à-terre tax. And then the second would be the ending of stock transfer rebate for the tax that is rebated back to stock traders. It currently exists, it's collected, and then it's returned to them. So ending that, returning to them, and holding on to that money is another proposal. Do you support those alternative revenue streams?
I've been an advocate for the pied-à-terre tax for a number of years. So I think we should have done it when we almost did it a couple of years ago. And then we'd have that revenue already. I think whoever owns a second home, especially when you're dealing with some of these multi-million dollars and even hundreds of millions of dollar homes and apartments, certainly there's no question that we should be taxing those. And I've been a strong advocate for that. We might differ a little bit on the stock transfer tax, but the reason is, I was on Wall Street for 25 years, and New Jersey tried it, and then they backed off because of technology the way it is now. I don't think we'll ever see that revenue, and security firms in general can easily route their trades through other locations, and we'd lose some of the back office jobs. And that's why New Jersey reversed it. They were going to do it with their budget situation, but they actually changed the stock transfer tax because they realized that they were going to lose jobs in New Jersey. So that's where I differ a little bit, because I do know that the technology is such on Wall Street, and they could easily be physically located here, but reroute the trades and the back office operations to other places. So that's the one place I do disagree, but not that I don't think, everybody should pay their fair share, including Wall Street. I just think that that's a tax that we'll end up not collecting.
Got it. And one question that I think may be a logical follow-on to this is many people don't know that the New York City Comptroller has a fairly large team of economists and researchers to look into things like the impact on the economy of certain scenarios or on New York City's finances. Would you use those researchers and economists to produce research or evidence into some of the potential effects or side effects of certain tax revenue or expenditure cut proposals. For example, looking in and trying to really see and quantify the impact of something like ending stock transfer tax rebate cancel policy.
Well, I would certainly have them look at it, but again, my fear in that is that it won't be actually collected. But I'd love to hear, their intelligence on it. But I also think we can use the audit function to do some of that, and I think the audit function is not being fully utilized. By law or by procedure, you only have to audit every single city agency once every 4 years. To me, that's absurd. Every city agency should be audited every year. And there's a lot of waste that can be found and a lot of money that can be saved by auditing the city agencies. Particularly, probably the biggest waste in the billions of dollars in our city budget, and that's money that could be used for services, is the outside consulting budget. The Department of Ed, for example, has billions and billions of dollars of outside consulting. It started with Mayor Bloomberg, where he expanded it significantly. We should take that away from these consultants, have regular city employees, and that could hire a lot more teachers. So I think there's a lot of waste in the agencies. I know Department of Education is right up there, one of the largest. The police department as well has a large outside consulting budget. I think we should basically cut that consulting budget rather than actual cut, city employees.
And on the topic of the police budget, I have a question which should be a kind of brief yes or no, but as controller, would you work to make police settlements with those who are in litigation with the city more public or transparent? The controller is the office in the city that approves such monetary settlements when something happens, like someone sues the police for excessive force. So even though you don't have a say in who's appointed police commissioner, but you do have some ability to increase transparency on cases where members of the public settle with the police department. Would you work to publicize details of those cases?
Absolutely. That's city money. The controller does sign off on these settlements. There's no question we should be trying to reduce that settlement. First of all, start off by not having these improprieties happening and reducing the budget, reducing the lawsuits there, because if people don't commit these atrocities, there won't be these huge cases against the city in the first place. So obviously, I supported an entire police reform package that we did over the summer at the state level. I know the city did their own package. So hopefully with these reforms, that'll limit some of these lawsuits, but there's no question we need transparency. The public is entitled to know all of that, and we should be looking to reduce some of these settlements, but also, preventing, the damage to be done in the first place, which results in the lawsuits.
Right. And one of the other things that the controller does is review city contracts. And unlike at the state level, where beginning with Governor David Patterson, we see real improvement in minority and women-owned business enterprises, MWBEs, receiving a greater share of state contracts. We have still lagged in that progress on the city level in terms of number of contracts awarded to MWBE firms. What would you do as controller to try to advance the city's progress in meeting its MWBE contract goals?
Well, I would make it a priority. There's no question that we need more MWBE participation, not only in the number of firms, but the economics of it. Because very often, people play with the numbers and the statistics, and they'll say, "Oh, we have, 100, MWBE contractors," but that doesn't mean that they're getting, their percentage of the business or the economics of it. So that's certainly something I would make a priority. I would let my, obviously you want, qualified contractors, but at the same time, there are more and more qualified MWBEs, and given that you have an MWBE, contractor, or in the case of Wall Street, a financial advisor or an underwriter of municipal bonds, an industry that I was in. There are a lot of qualified MWBE firms, and there's no question that they should be getting their fair share. And I don't think that's happening now. And I would certainly do everything I can, whether it be through a task force or through the employees in the controller's office, and there are over 700 employees in the controller's office, to basically get the word out and make it a priority to actively recruit more MWBE firms, at the same time making sure that MWBE firms have a chance to share in the economics.
Thank you. And I wanted to squeeze in one more question, if we could, before your kind of closing remarks, which is a question about performance audits of agencies. So one of the things that people do know that the controller does is it can conduct audits of city agencies, not just for fiscal audits, but also in terms of whether or not the agency is meeting its performance goals. And this question is a little nuanced. And I'll give you an example. What types of metrics would you look at when trying to determine an agency's performance? And is there anything change? And the example I'll use is the Administration for Children's Services. So there are some, very obvious performance metrics that are commonly used, like the number of cases per caseworker, or the number of removals, or the time between the beginning of investigation and the closing. But those metrics don't necessarily show ACS's impact on family welfare. It just shows their ability to remove children from a family efficiently. And so I guess the question is, given that sometimes the metrics we're measuring aren't the right metrics and can in fact skew the performance in ways that we don't want, and we see this, anytime somebody invents a metric, people eventually start working to meet the metric rather than the real goal. What types of questions would you ask when undertaking performance audits of agencies?
Well, one is that's another place where we can, crack down on some of the abuse in these outside consultants and the expansion of outside consultants. So I think it's important that the agencies themselves have the employees to perform, efficiency, in their agencies. In the case of ACS, we have to make sure that that there's a quality of supervision, and it's not just the numbers. It's not just how many people are affected. It has to, you don't want to have one particular caseworker being overloaded with too many cases where there's a potential for things to slip through the cracks, and children's lives are at stake. So I think one is maybe we should have more ACS workers and supervisors, well, not supervisors so much, but more on the line social workers visiting and examining situations in the family, and you can't have too many cases on one caseworker. So I think you have to take that in mind, keep that in mind, because there are actually children's lives and family lives that could be unfortunately affected to the negative if too few caseworkers are handling too many cases.
Yes, and although I will note as an aside, unfortunately, most ACS caseworkers are not social workers. But I will now turn.
Well, maybe there should be more. Maybe there
Yes.
should be more social workers.
I will turn the floor over to you for closing remarks on why you should be our next controller, and then we'll move on to Senator Parker.
Okay, I feel I'm uniquely qualified, especially during this post-pandemic fiscal crisis that we're going to be in for many years to come. I have extensive background in both the public and private public finance sectors and financial fields, having served as chair of the Finance Committee of the City Council for 8 years, having balanced 8 budgets, having been involved in turning large billion-dollar deficits into surpluses, having served as deputy superintendent of banking for the state, and having had an extensive public finance private sector career where I was involved in the debt issuance function of the city, which is what public finance is, building hospitals, building schools, building infrastructure, and that's an important part of the debt issuance function of the city controller along with the mayor. So I think I'm uniquely qualified. And I think the fact that my progressive values have been important to me throughout my entire life. I've been a huge advocate for immigrant issues, for religious freedom. Two of the bills that I'm most proud of in my legislative career were the religious garb bill, which would prohibit discrimination in all employment for people against people for wearing religious garb or facial hair for religious reasons, like turbans for Sikhs, like hijabs for Muslim women, and so many other aspects. Another bill I'm very proud of is the Adoptee Bill of Rights, which would allow adoptees for the first time since 1938, and that's only been in effect about a year, to have access to original birth certificate. That's a civil rights issue. It's something I worked on throughout my assembly career. But as far as the controller's office goes, I really think I have the right qualifications, both private sector and public sector, in very relevant finance experience.
Thank you, Assemblymember Weprin. And we will now move right along to our next candidate that we'll be hearing from, Senator Parker.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. Senator Kevin Parker go. Oh, here he is. Senator, you're muted.
Hey, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I am good, and I'm very happy that we're all here digitally together.
Likewise. So
you can begin with kind of about a 5-minute opening remarks, explaining who you are, why you're running, and then we'll do some questions and then a brief closing. So we'll do this until about 7:18 or so.
All right, perfect. Again, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn. I'm the majority whip in the New York State Senate, as well as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and I am a candidate for the New York City Comptroller. I am here in front of you folks this evening because I'm looking for your endorsement, would love your support and your help in this election, because I think I share your values. I think that my experience, I think that my leadership, and more importantly, I think that the vision that I share for this office, is in line with your club, but also is the right direction for the city of New York. We're in a time right now in this pandemic in which people are fighting both for their lives and for their livelihoods, and we have to save both. And we have a lot going on, in terms of food insecurity, income insecurity, housing, some part of which we addressed some yesterday in the state legislature. But there's still so much more that needs to be done. And certainly, I think that this job is really, next to the mayor, literally the most important job in the state of New York, as it relates to how we're going to provide leadership for the people of the state of New York and the people of the city of New York to find their way out of this pandemic. Look, there's a lot going on right now. We're certainly going to need a stimulus, even beyond the stimulus that it looks like we're going to receive from the federal government. Certainly, the state legislature is going to need to do some work around progressive, taxation and providing some support as well in terms of, taxing the ultra wealthy. But we're not going to tax our way out of this crisis. We're going to have to build our way out of this crisis. And what I'm committed to do is, day one, setting up an economic council that's going to help guide our path, putting together a collaborative team of business leaders, labor leaders, community leaders, clergy leaders, to sit around and work with my staff to develop and chart a way out. But I do know that an important part of that is going to be about creating full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, which I have a lot of expertise at doing. We have an economy in the city of New York that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street. And we have to really make sure that those Main Street jobs get the kind of both technical assistance and access to capital they need in order to hire people. Because really, when we look at where full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits are going to come from, it's going to come from our main streets. And if we aren't building those jobs and making that our first priority, we'll never get our economy back moving. And I'm certainly committed to that. Certainly I want to make sure that we do things like audit the police department. It's like going to be one of the first things I do. I'm the leader in the state legislature on police reform. As you know, that after the murder of George Floyd, state legislature in New York was the first one to get together and do a comprehensive set of police reforms. We passed 10 bills. 4 of the bills were mine that became law, including legislation that creates body cameras for all state police officers, a piece of legislation that creates a Office of Police Misconduct in the Attorney General's office, a bill that reaffirms our right to record police officers in that activity, as well as the 911 false reporting bill. And I'm committed to continue that kind of work. I've also introduced other legislation, including a bill that creates a non-police response to mental health and homeless calls that we certainly need to put into effect. And so I think that we need to, in this city, reimagine law enforcement, and then we need to have some alternatives. And I think bills like that are going to be really important. But I also want to do things like define excessive use of force in the law. I want to make sure that we deal with qualified immunity and NYPD residency. I think it's going to be important that we are policed by the people in our own community. And I think that also is part of an economic development strategy as well. And then lastly, let me just certainly talk about the pension fund. It's a huge pension fund. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of responsibility. And it's a dual function. I think that, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, right? And so we have to certainly make sure that we're providing a value for pensioners. But simultaneously, and this is something that's not, dichotomous, is to create a fund that in fact reflects the values of the people of the city of New York. And so we certainly can do both things at the same time. And that certainly means also making sure that women and minorities, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, get their opportunity to manage money in the pension fund, to make sure our NWBE programs are operating effectively. Because again, we have to have a economic strategy in which all boats rise together. And so I'm committed to that. I'm looking forward to working with you all to do that important work. And I'm looking forward to your questions so we can tease out more of both my ideas and how we can partner together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for being right on time with your remarks. It makes my life easier. I wanted to you had mentioned that, we will be facing some very new and unique challenges that we haven't seen in quite a while as a result of the economic damage and the damage to our tax revenues that the pandemic's caused. And so I'll ask you the same question that I started with Assemblymember Weprin, which is, what is your understanding of, this budget justice campaign that is everywhere these days, and that the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club was one of the first clubs to sign on to support? Do you support it? And how are you using your current position in the state Senate to make the revenue system more equitable so that we can do that kind of building and investing on our communities and main streets that you mentioned? And then finally, the last segment of that question is, if you became controller, how would you then pursue that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, there has to be a reimagining of our budgets and our taxation system on both the city level and the state level. We have a lot of regressive taxation that happens, again, on both the state and city level. So I certainly support budget justice, making sure that we put money into the right places. But I also think that there needs to be a top to bottom look at how we're spending money. And so I think some of the numbers, we could talk about what the number is, right? But certainly the notion of reimagining our police department, for instance, and putting money in areas in which we need it. In other words, if we're spending more money with our young people in terms of youth development, then we have less gangs. We have less gangs, that means we have less crime. We have less crime, then we need less money for some of the kind of military type policing that we've been seeing, right? We need more money in our schools for things like social workers and psychologists. We need school-based health clinics, right? All of those become programs that we ought to be looking at. How do we fund those? And if we can, in fact, shift money from the prison pipeline into education, into social services, into growing good citizens, then that's certainly less money that we need for other types of things. So those are the kind of solutions that I've been fighting for 18 years in the state Senate, and it's certainly what I'll continue to fight for. And I think in particular, I think that there needs to be audits of places like the police department, like the Department of Ed, and to look at the performance mechanisms that are being used to making budgetary decisions. And I think for a long time, those questions and those issues have not been answered.
Thank you. And I want to touch on something that you also mentioned, which are the pension fund investments. So for those who don't know, the New York City Comptroller is, by dint of the office, an advisor to and responsible for the retirement pensions of the city employees, as well as certain other pension funds for specific employees like the police, fire, teachers, etc. So what specifically would you change about how funds are invested in terms of the impact those funds have on our city?
Well, I have a background in finance, having worked on Wall Street at UBS, Payne Weber, worked for Carl McCall in the state controller's office. But my 18 years in the Senate, I've actually spent all 18 being on the finance committee, and over 10 years on the banking committee, almost 10 years in the insurance committee. So these issues around municipal finance have been my stock in trade as a state legislator. And I really want to bring that to the job, that experience, that understanding, and the legislative experience as well, to get these things, get these issues implemented. As it relates to the pension system, I think both, again, job one is to make sure that the pension system, that all 5 of the pension systems make money. And that's just, again, critical that we take care of our pensioners and that we don't create more of a debt for the city of New York. And then beyond that, again, it's important that we have a system that represents and reflects our values as New Yorkers. To invest more in the clean energy economy, and to invest in businesses that invest in New York businesses. Right now, that we don't really look at investing in money managers or putting money in the hands of money managers that are investing in New York City businesses. We're going to need that investment so that we're not sending money helter-skelter into the ether, even if it makes a profit. There are profits to be made in this city, the largest city in the country, the best city in the world, making sure that we help the businesses that are growing here and help to grow those businesses and provide the access to capital to them so that we can have, full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits. And so that's going to really be my focus. And then again, as I mentioned before, there really has to be a lot more equity as it relates to who's actually doing the investment in those businesses. Less than 2% of the pension fund is invested with African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and women, and that's really a crime, frankly. And we need to do better at that. I will do better at that, and I'll look forward to working with you as we get that done.
Excellent. One question that came in over the Q&A is from April Tyler, who is a force and our former female district leader.
Yes.
And the question is about the city's tax lien sale. So as I'm sure you know, the City Council has postponed its renewal of the tax lien sale authority bill. But the Comptroller audits the financial side of the tax lien sale, but has not, I don't believe, performed any sort of performance audit in terms of looking at the impact that these tax lien sales have had on, people's lives and the communities that these buildings are in. And for those watching at home, the tax lien sale is, if you owe the city money, the city can, instead of foreclosing on, if you owe the city property taxes or water bills, the city, instead of foreclosing on your property, can just sell that debt for a little less than what it is to a Wall Street financial firm who can then load it up with fees and onerous things and attempt to collect it and foreclose on it themselves. So the question is, would you as Comptroller do a performance audit or an audit of the impact that these tax lien sales have aside from the revenue on the city?
Absolutely. I would look at the performance part of it and really the unequitable distribution of those tax liens and really really with the purpose trying to eliminate it. I really think there's probably better ways for us to collect the debt and to dispose of property than to continue to burden it. We know that the vast majority of the folks on the tax lien sale are not just people who are poor New Yorkers, but many of them are overrepresented by Blacks and Latinos on the list, and we certainly have to deal with that. And so the short answer is yes. The long answer is that we really need a more equitable system and a better way to dispose of these issues.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to sneak in 2 more questions before
Okay.
closing remarks. One is, and I have to commend our current New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer, who has really done an excellent job in partnering with various constituencies and communities and activists and groups in the city who attempt to talk to his office about ways that they can improve the city. My question is, and you mentioned, having a roundtable or a task force, how would you interact with activists, the public, academics studying public policy as controller in an effort to, really bring about improvements to the city, both through the budget and perhaps research the potential impacts of proposed policy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll do that the way I've always done it as a state legislator, which is, to have an open door, policy and to work with everybody in a very kind of collaborative fashion. I've talked about having a economic justice council that will help us lead our way out of the city. But in my other life, I'm an academic. I'm actually, I've been a PhD candidate at the CUNY Grad Center, so I'm used to working with folks like that. I've worked with the Du Bois Bunch Center at Medgar Evers College. I interned at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies in DC. And so that kind of work with people like Fran Piven, who was my academic advisor, and folks like that have been very influential. And so I understand the importance of that kind of research, but also working with activists, as I am now, working with groups like the NWC, the Brooklyn NYCP, which I'm a member, the New York Urban League, in which I'm a member. Been working with some folks at Freedom March NYC on some of the issues around police reform, and so I will continue to kind of do that level of work, on the ground, meeting with folks, getting their ideas, and figuring out ways that we can collaborate. I have been literally the most productive member of the state legislature over the last couple of years, particularly this year, in which even in the pandemic year, I passed 40 bills out of the Senate this year. 21 went to the governor's office, 20 have been signed into law. And so, so my actions have not just been for form or for fashion, but really trying to change the law to make this state a more equitable place. And I certainly am looking forward to working with you to, in fact, make the city a more equitable place, particularly from an economic perspective.
Excellent. And one more question, which is about the city's contracting process and MWBE's, minority women-owned business enterprises. What would you do as controller to push the city forward towards meeting or exceeding MWBE contract goals?
Yeah, so I mean, I've done a lot of that work already, having worked with the old commissioner of SBS, Small Business Services, Greg Bishop, and now with my good friend John L. Doris, who actually is a former staffer in the state Senate, but when he worked in the mayor's office overseeing MWBE, I worked with him on legislation. We actually passed some legislation last session on changing the goals and freeing up some more money that doesn't have to go through the contracting process in order to, again, provide more opportunity. What we know about businesses and what we know particularly about Black and Latino businesses is that they need access to capital and they need technical assistance. And the third thing they need in this moment is figuring out where money went during the pandemic. We didn't end our economy, we slowed it down. And there's still economic opportunity, and we just really have to make everybody understand where those opportunities are. And so, in this budget, we have the fourth largest budget in the city, in the country, right? The city of New York, if it was its own country, would be the 12th largest economy in the world. We over $25 billion every year is contracted out. We should be making sure that Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women get their fair share of those economic opportunities to create, not because we care about petty bourgeois capitalism, but because we understand that we need to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, and we know that small businesses, particularly in minority communities, are the way that those jobs are created.
Excellent. And so I will ask you for some final remarks to really just tell us why should we endorse you for to be our next New York City Comptroller?
Well, first, let me just say, again, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak before you. And it's not enough conversation, but I'm always looking forward to more conversation on these important issues. I think that I'm running for city controller because I think that my leadership, I think that my vision for the position and my experience is what exactly the city needs at this moment in order to pull us through. I have again, a lot of experience passing legislation, working with, the governor, working with the mayor. I worked a lot with Scott Stringer when he was as the controller and Manhattan Borough president, with Eric Adams as the borough president. And so those relationships, I think, are going to bear fruit as well as we go forward. We need vision, and I think that understanding not just what the problems are, but more importantly, what the solutions are for how we allow everybody to move forward, to have a equity justice understanding is critical. As the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, I have been intimately involved in building the clean energy economy in the state of New York, and I want to build that clean energy economy here in the city of New York. While other people have been talking about EJ, I've been doing that work, creating an EJ panel that oversees the CLCPA. Right, I helped negotiate the CLCPA with members of the task force out of the Senate and the Assembly, and so that work goes forward. And also in that same committee, we've done a lot of work on broadband expansion. Just recently, I helped work with NYC and Verizon to provide a real proper broadband plan and package for families in NYC who really need access to high speed broadband. Those are the kind of problems that are being solved by my office in this moment. I want to bring more of those understanding, more of that leadership to the city. And so I'm hoping that you'll endorse me and that we'll continue to work together as we, bring our city to a place that was even better than it was before the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. And now we will hear from Senator Sanders' colleague from Brooklyn in the City Council, Councilmember Brad Lander. So Councilmember, we are going to start with a 5-minute kind of introductory remarks. Tell us who you are, a bit your background, and why you should be our endorsed candidate for the next New York City Controller. And then we'll go into about 10 minutes worth of questions and then wrap up with some closing remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry and Lois and the entire West Harlem Progressive Democratic team for the invitation to speak. And to everybody who's on here giving their night to yet one more Zoom because you believe that much in local democracy. That's a lot, I gotta say. I also want to start by saying a big thank you to everyone on this call who organized to help Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win and is busy right now. Probably you're on your other phone texting for Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff in the Georgia Senate races. I share your passion for building a strong Democratic Party that's rooted in racial, social, and economic justice and aiming for a more progressive and livable New York City where we really have affordable housing, climate justice, can invest in our schools, and win real criminal justice reform with less police intervention strategies so we could get public safety for everyone, along with greater protection for all of our people, especially at the moment, our frontline and essential workers. So I'm excited to share my vision for the Comptroller's office in what are going to be hard and important years ahead. Before I entered politics, I had a 15-year career running two great nonprofit organizations, the Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn and the Pratt Center for Community Development, building and preserving affordable housing, supporting neighborhood planning in all 5 boroughs, including a lot of work uptown, saving neighborhood commercial strips, and supporting environmental justice fights all around the city. For the past 10 years, I've had the honor of serving in the City Council, where I've led some big fights. Just recently, after a 2-year campaign, the council passed my bill to protect fast food workers from being fired for no reason with what are called just cause employment protections. And that builds on work with them to win paid sick days, the fight for 15 and a fair work week. I've written and passed legislation to create strong tenant protections, hold reckless drivers accountable, protect freelancers from wage theft, ban plastic bags, implement participatory budgeting, and strengthen our city's campaign finance laws. And in all of that work, my idea has been you make government work better by working closely with community leaders like those on this call, and by taking a good hard look at the data and really holding government to account. And that's the approach we're going to need for the daunting challenge we face of securing a just and durable recovery to help millions of struggling families who can't pay the rent and are standing in long lines just to get food, to save our beloved small businesses and rebuild our city's economy. You know that we face a severe budget crisis that's going to require making hard choices. And I've made those choices as a member of the council for the past 10 years. But we also know from Keynesian economics that we need to make smart city capital investments in long-term rebuilding. It was out of past crises that our city's leaders pioneered investments in the subway, in CUNY, in Mitchell-Lama. And those investments were the platform for our city's growth and success for over a century. We can and must do the same today with investments in clean energy and resilient infrastructure to mitigate and prepare for the climate crisis, in the affordable housing and supportive housing our families and communities need, in culture and the arts, in sustainable innovation, in care work. We can create hundreds of thousands of good green jobs and bring our city back from this crisis better and fairer, more attuned to the need for racial justice and to be ready for the climate crisis than we were before the pandemic. But all of that requires that we make government work better, because government can't deliver on any of those promises when city agencies are run poorly, when money's wasted, when results aren't clear, when projects don't get done on time, when there's no accountability for mismanagement, and when corruption goes unchecked. And I'm running for a New York City Comptroller to help our city rise to exactly those challenges. The tools of the Comptroller's office, making sure we're spending public dollars and investing public pensions responsibly, making sure our agencies are working more effectively, addressing claims against the city more thoughtfully. Those tools can help confront our city's biggest challenges: economic recovery, the affordable housing crisis, achieving public safety with less police abuse, and especially, since the Comptroller is the office charged with taking the long-term view on our city, the climate crisis, which is our biggest long-term risk. I've laid out a bunch of those issues in detailed policy platforms on my website, on the climate crisis, on safer streets with less policing, on investing in a just and durable economic recovery, transforming the office's audit bureau. I've got a great plan coming soon for social housing, building on the Mitchell-Lama shared equity homeownership model. And I'm really honored to have the chance to talk with you here tonight in some more details, because we're going to need all hands for the hard work ahead.
Thank you. And we're very happy that you're here and that you've joined us. I want to start again by kind of the same question that everyone's getting first tonight. Many of the big ideas that you have put forward about ways we need to turn our city around and strengthen it require money and revenue. And the city is facing, the city and the state really are facing some of the toughest years they've seen in the past decade or two in terms of our tax revenues and the impact the coronavirus has had.
Yep.
What is your understanding of the New York Budget Justice Campaign, of which the West Harlem Progressive Democrats are a coalition member? And do you support it? And then what are you doing with your current position as a city council member to make our revenue system more equitable and fair so that we can invest in our communities? And then what would you do as Comptroller?
Those are great questions. I support that campaign. I think it's great that West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club is part of it, and we're going to need a lot of pushing. First I'll say, look, I mentioned the fight in Georgia already. I do think it's important to start by saying, winning in Georgia is not only good democracy policy, it is good fiscal policy. In order for New York City to have a fair economy that matches what we're sending to Washington with what we're getting back, we need a Washington that will do right by cities and states. I don't know if we're going to get that. I'm doing all I can. I know you guys are doing all you can. You can't make up for, we can do other things, but you can't make up for the federal government failing to support cities and states and being fair. So that's number one. let's win those seats because, federal relief for the MTA for our city, a critical part of budget justice. Then it is Albany, unfortunately, and not New York City, that has the power to do fair taxation, to expand, to have a billionaire's tax on wealth or expend the millionaire's tax on income, to close the carried interest loophole that lets private equity fund managers have their income taxed at half of what yours and mine is taxed at. So I support a range of those are my top two, a billionaire's tax and closing the private equity loophole, but I support other approaches, a pied-à-terre tax. There are a range of ways that we could get progressive revenue from Albany. And we need to fight and organize for it. That's not on the city or the controller, but we have to be making the case, showing what happens if we don't get it and being part of those fights together. Now at the city level, which is obviously the office we're all running for, just a couple of quick thoughts. One, we do need to make the property tax fairer. Ultimately, that'll take partnership in Albany as well, but that is a responsibility the next controller will have, to be a force for fairness on the property tax. That might not get us more revenue for a while, but we can't even look at the property tax as a fair revenue right now. So we need to, that's like a starting place. So I'll put a lot of energy into that. And then, a big part of the budget justice campaign this year at the council was taking a look at the NYPD budget in particular, which was spared being cut even when we were cutting teachers and cutting parks workers and cutting sanitation workers. I signed on early to the budget justice campaign saying I would not vote for the budget if it did not cut $1 billion from the NYPD. It didn't even come close. We didn't even put a hiring freeze in place, which we did in all those other agencies. So that's going to be one more important element. We're still going to have hard choices to make, but those are the places that I would start.
Thank you. And I want to ask a question that we also kind of asked previously, but getting at this idea of performance audits, which the controller can do. There are some questions as to what are we measuring when we look for good performance in a city agency. The police for years measured arrests, and unsurprisingly, arrests went up when they were being measured, but those arrests may not have always been just, and in fact had very, very real harmful impacts on innocent people's lives. The same could be said for, ACS interventions into families where really ACS is investigating a family for what is essentially poverty rather than, doing what they can to support a family so that they don't go into difficult situations with their kids. How would you approach this idea of performance audits, and what would you look at and maybe reconsider in terms of how we're evaluating performance at an agency?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to talk for a minute about performance audits, but I want to talk about equity audits as well, which I think are another tool in the toolkit. But I'll start with an example. I've put up on my website a plan for transforming traffic safety. And because I'm confident that we can have fewer people killed and injured in traffic crashes with less policing. My plan actually calls for pulling NYPD out of routine traffic stops, like the ones that resulted in the deaths of Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, and Alan Felice up in the Bronx. We know, and we're seeing it in the pandemic right now, we've actually seen crashes go up this year. One of the leading causes for that is the city's very most reckless drivers. And you see them out there, a pretty small percentage of people just drive like maniacs, like they don't care about the lives of their neighbors, sadly, maybe even of themselves. And we know who they are, not because we could send out officers to find them, but because they're the ones getting so many red light and speeding camera violations. And you can see it in the data. So I passed a bill earlier this year to create a reckless driver accountability program that will use that data from the cameras to say to that top 1% of most reckless drivers, you have to change how you drive it. You either have to, we'll give you a course. If you can change your ways in driving, good. And if you can't, we're going to have to take your license or your vehicle because we can't have you putting your neighbors' lives at risk like that. So what I think that was built on, and what we can measure there's pretty straightforward things to measure. Who are causing the crashes that are injuring and killing our neighbors? Obviously, that costs money as well as lives. And what are the strategies that reduce those crashes? And we have a lot of them. And so that's what that legislation was built on. And that's the model I want to bring for performance auditing, right? Like, what are the goals? What are the strategies that are getting them done? And that's when you then have to add in this question that I think you also implied of equity audits alongside performance auditing, which is, okay, what are the goals we're trying to hit? We got to get the garbage picked up. We want to keep people safe on the streets. We've got a set of services we want to deliver. Are they getting delivered? And then you have to ask this question: are they getting delivered fairly or not? So there's a whole new field of equity auditing by a group called the Government Alliance for Race and Equity that's now part of a broader organization called Race Forward. And they've pioneered tools. Some of them are straightforward, like MWBE contracting. That's a straightforward way of saying, in our contracting, do we have equity? And we know, sadly, the answer is we don't. But at least we now have measures. We are evaluating MWBE performance, and we can see how far short of parity we are. You can bring that same lens to a wide range of other areas. You mentioned ACS. That's a perfect agency to bring an equity auditing lens to, and really try to be straightforward about what the differences are that Black families and families of color face in relationship to that agency relative to white agencies. You've seen more of this in COVID. COVID, of course, has revealed a whole set of inequities. It took a while to get the department, the Health and Hospitals and the Department of the DOHMH to release the data by race and by neighborhood. And as soon as that happened, you started to see what was going on in the city in a depressing but important way. That's a role for the controller to play, is to bring that kind of lens to the audits.
Excellent. I think that's a really important point that we need to all consider. And then I want to talk about not just equity in terms of auditing for equity, but also in terms of city contracts. So we have a question, a specific question about the contracts from a club member. The current controller, Scott Stringer, has an MWBE program in place to connect them with the contract opportunities to have an MWBE university. What would you as controller do to advance the city's MWBE priorities and goals, and also try to make sure that these opportunities help improve people's lives, like tenants at NYCHA who are qualified for some of this work or some of these jobs?
Absolutely. So first, I think it's important to distinguish the things that controller actually has the power over from the areas where you're providing oversight, because you can't provide good oversight on MWBE if you're not living up to it yourself first. And the main areas that the controller is involved in hiring people for are around asset management. So that's both consultants, advisors, pension fund managers, and on the public finance side, the firms that are issuing the city's bonds. And Scott has actually done a better job. This has moved in the right direction, but we're still far from parity in making sure that MWBE firms are involved in underwriting our bonds and managing our pension funds. And that's something that I would put a high priority on, because you've got to be able to, if you point one finger out, you got three fingers pointing back. So you got to make sure that the controller's office is living up to it. And Scott has moved this in the right direction, but there's more work to do. And then, there are some agencies that are doing better. It's interesting. I just was having a conversation with Mike Garner at National Action Network on Christmas. They got, for the first time last year, over $1 billion in MWBE contracts out through the MTA. And I was talking to him a little about what's making that work. And I think there are some strategies they are using. And it's not just subcontracting. I think one problem, we've leaned too much on having a prime contractor and a subcontractor. One thing they're doing is breaking the contracts out into smaller bundles so that prime contractors can be MWBEs. Yes, it's smaller than if you had bundled them all together, but they have a bigger role than if they had just been a sub on somebody's larger job. And then look, Section 3 in NYCHA is an issue all its own. That goes beyond MWBE and saying, are we achieving parity in our contracting? But are we, for the set of folks who we've most excluded, doing right to make sure that we are affirmatively and proactively creating opportunities? I'll just give one example here of a thing I'd like to try. We're lagging behind in rooftop solar installations in the city of where we need to be. And a thing I'd like to try right now, we've provided subsidies and tax breaks to home and building owners, but that limits our ability to determine who gets hired for that work because we don't control that work. You know, if you're just lending or giving someone a tax break, you can't guide their hiring. I'd like to see us explore using city capital dollars, which we use for utilities already, right? That's what rips up our streets and, pays for our street lights. There's no reason we couldn't use city capital to build rooftop solar, pay the building owners and homeowners a rent, but the city is what is generating the power. Then the city itself becomes a municipally owned clean energy utility, but it also means the city would contract for the work. And that work, in general, a lot of the green building work in NYCHA, but also in private buildings, installing rooftop solar is just such an important opportunity for us to create good green jobs, make sure they're going to MWBEs, and make sure they're going, especially in NYCHA through Section 3 to NYCHA residents.
Thank you. And I want to now give just one last kind of closing opportunity. Why should you be our choice to be New York City's next controller?
Thank you. Well, first I want to say again what an honor it is to be here. You've got some great choices for New York City controller, and you've got a hometown, you've got a home neighborhood choice who I respect a lot. So I respect the choices that all New Yorkers are going to make. I think the months and years ahead are just absolutely critical months and years for our city. And I've been working in partnership with just a great array of groups. I was pleased last week to be endorsed by the Working Families Party, by Make the Road New York, by Vocal, by New York Communities for Change, by a few of my colleagues, Debbie Rose and Margaret Chin, some great state senators, Alessandro Biaggi, Andrew Gurnardis. We're building a great team all across the city with this idea that we have to learn from this crisis. This one we couldn't see coming. And we're paying the cost in thousands of lives of our neighbors. We've got to be more prepared for the next ones. One of those is the racial justice crisis. Is a city that's so unequal that it doesn't live up to the values that we teach our kids or that are the founding ideals of our city. And the other is the climate crisis, which we know is coming. And I think if we can lean into building a city that has a genuine, inclusive, multiracial democracy, that is genuinely prepared for the climate future, that does that in a way that really puts climate justice forward, we can build a city that comes out of this crisis in a way that is thriving. But the only way we can do all of that is if we restore trust in government, because right now there's so little trust in the city that people don't believe it could do any of those things. So I want us to have big, bold, progressive goals, but then tell the truth about what's working and what's not working, hold people accountable, do that in partnership with groups like yours. It's not a kind of accountant who's got a sharpened pencil. It's somebody who builds shared accountability by working with New Yorkers to hold us accountable to those goals. That's what I would like to do with the Comptroller's office. I'd love to have your support and partnership in doing it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lander.
Thank you so much. It was really an honor to be here.
We're happy to have you. And we will finish with Senator Brian Benjamin from our own neck of the woods uptown here in Harlem. Senator, welcome. And why don't you go ahead and give us kind of the 5-minute introduction. I know many of our club members already know you, but go ahead and give it again anyway, of who you are and your background and why you should be the next New York City Comptroller.
Thank you so much, Barry, Lois. I mean, the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club, I'm having nostalgia just thinking about how the club has grown over the years. I remember myself and April Tyler and Sylvia Tyler working hard to keep this club going. And so thank you for keeping it going. And you're doing a phenomenal job. Let me just say, this has been a really tough year for a lot of us. COVID has ravaged the United States, has ravaged New York City in particular. We are a city that is incredibly vulnerable to pandemics because we're so dense. We're such everyone travels here, and so we are a natural place for a pandemic to really cause a lot of damage. And one of the things that is so important as you think about who you want to support in 2021, for mayor, controller, public advocate, et cetera, is that you want people who can get the job done. So let me talk a little bit about that. Number one, I believe that the controller's first and primary job is to make sure that the $225 billion plus of the pension fund goes towards safeguarding the retirements of those who have been teachers, firefighters, folks who worked on the front lines. A lot of essential workers have their retirements in the hands of the controller. And you need someone who actually, in my case, has experience managing money. I have an investment management background. I've managed money previously. I'm the only candidate running who has done that. I think that why is that so important is because if the pension fund doesn't deliver the 7% required return that it needs to do every year vis-a-vis the actuary, the city of New York has to put more money into propping up the pension. That can be hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So you want to make sure you have a controller who can get the job done on that front. My parents are retired on a pension. My mom was a secretary for a local union. She came here as an immigrant from Guyana. My dad, an immigrant from Jamaica, a janitor at 32 BJ his whole life. They need this pension to live. So we've got to make sure that happens, and I'm committed to doing that. Secondly, we want a controller who's going to help use the public pension fund to focus on key issues that need to be addressed. So for example, the homelessness crisis. You know, over 2%, around 2% of the pension fund goes towards economically targeted investments. Right now, that's not being fully utilized. And I believe that we should take some of that money and acquire hotels that are at the brink of bankruptcy, some of which are only being propped up because the city of New York is providing those who are in shelters to these hotels. Some of them are CD operators. We should take that business over ourselves. We should purchase those hotels and provide permanent supportive housing with a permanent supportive housing operator and pay way less than the money we're paying now. Over $6,000 right now goes towards a family per month staying in one of these shelters. Over $3,000 for individuals. We could do much better in the city of New York. Then we have an affordable housing crisis that, to me, I used to be an affordable housing developer, built new construction, rehab buildings. There is no reason why the city of New York does not have a true plan to build affordable housing that is needed. We have an affordable housing plan right now that is sort of spotty. You know, the rezonings that come, they're just one-offs. Why don't we have city planning with a structured plan? I believe the controller can work with the city of New York to say, we're going to build the affordable housing that's needed for this city, and we're going to use pension fund money to do it, and we're going to make a good return on it for our retirees. That, to me, is a win-win-win. The controller also has a number of other skill sets. One is that the controller has the power to audit. I believe the first day one, we should be looking at auditing the New York Police Department. The $6 billion plus, where is that money going towards, and how is that keeping us more safe? We need to be having programmatic audits around the money we're spending and exactly what are those funds doing to keep us more safe as relates to the NYPD. We need accountability and transparency, and I'm prepared to get that done. Next, the controller has the power to register contracts. There are so many contracts that are being registered right now in the city of New York, and those contracts, in my view, need to be looked at for a couple of things. One is there corruption or fraud, but also what are the diversity history and track record of these companies? Are they hiring people prevailing wages? Are they getting good pay? We need to have responsible contractor policies across the board that we're looking at, not only for the controller's office, but the whole city of New York. And if there are bad actors, the controller should not sign those contracts. Force the mayor to override the controller, and let's make that public. And I think that is an activism play that I think is also very important. Lastly, I will say that the controller has the power to settle claims. I introduced a bill recently that said, back to the NYPD, I'm sorry, but right now the NYPD is a real problem in the city of New York. We talk about racial justice. You can't talk about that without talking about over-incarceration. But what are these settlements that are happening with NYPD? Are those settlements, do we know what they are? Are there certain precincts where there's more bad miscarriages of justice? We should find that out now before we have more George Floyd type scenarios, Eric Garner type scenarios in the city of New York. Let's get ahead of that. I think the controller can do that. Lastly, I'll just mention on the environmental front, our existing controller, Scott Stringer, has a report that is going to be provided as it relates to divesting from fossil fuels. I'm in full support of that. Looking forward to see that report. But the next step after that report is we actually have to implement it. The controller does not have sole trustee powers within the pension funds. You have to convince the different boards in order to make different investment decisions. I have the background and the experience where I know how to have those conversations with these boards to make sure that our values get implemented while making sure that the retirees are protected. We've got to do both at the same time. And I'm the controller. I'm the controller candidate who actually knows how to do both: our values and provide returns for the retirees.
Excellent. Well, I thank you for being here and for laying that out for us. And I
Thank
do want to
you.
get back to that, but I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked everybody first,
Of course.
which is, what is your understanding of the New York Budget Justice Campaign, which the West Harlem Progressive Democrats are a coalition member in support of? And do you support it? And how are you using your current powers to make New York's revenue system more equitable so that we can make these types of investments in our communities? And then how would you continue that, the role as controller?
Well, thank you for that question. There's a couple points. I am presently the chair of the Budget and Revenues Committee in the Senate. So I was the person who the Senate majority tasked with creating the working group to evaluate a number of the proposals of the Budget Justice platform, and spent a lot of time with Strong Economy for All leaders, Michael Kink, and others, talking about the different proposals and sort of going over assumptions as to how revenue is determined or not determined. So let's start with my personal opinion. Personally, I believe that we have to, without question, in an economy where there are people who are making billions and billions of dollars in the stock market while people are suffering and can't pay their rent, we have to create more equality on that front. I'm in support of a number of the proposals. The issue that we have had is we have to agree with the assembly and work with the governor on that front. And some of that has been challenging. But from my perspective, what I've tried to do within my capacity is make sure that all of my colleagues are very clear on all the different proposals, what I stand for. I give a big presentation to the conference, to the leader. I talk to her very regularly as she's trying to negotiate with the governor and the speaker of the assembly. The Senate has been very sort of aggressive in terms of being clear that we have a number of ideas as it relates to revenue that we want to have happen. But obviously, the Senate doesn't control all of Albany, so that process has to play itself out. But I've been very active on that front and will continue to be active on that front. As the controller, I think one of the things that the controller has to focus on, and as I think Brad mentioned earlier, the controller doesn't have this power, but the controller does have the power to really try to think about how we're going to grow out of this COVID crisis. You know, one of the things that I think needs to be looked at programmatically is what are some of the key industries that we have got to sort of turbocharge? And I think the controller can play the role of the educator to the city council and to the mayor. Look, you got a $70 million budget, over 700 staff members. Those staff members can be utilized to focus on some key issues. And I can't think of a bigger issue. There's a number of key issues, but one of them that's very important is how do we grow out of this COVID crisis? And what are some of the key things that government could be doing as we look at economic development projects? What is a good economic development project? What should it include? What should it not include? Those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having substantively, not in this political back and forth with people just screaming and yelling at each other, and whoever has the loudest voice wins the day. We should be talking about the facts, and I think the controller could play a very important role in driving that.
Thank you. And then I wanted to kind of turn back to some remarks from your opening statement about, you know, the possibility of investing pension fund assets to produce things like affordable housing while meeting or exceeding the pension fund 7% return hurdle.
Right.
And so can you kind of talk more about that? Because I think that's something that, you know, New York really hasn't done in a very long time.
Yeah, I think the way you do it is that the controller issues an RFP to a number of possible developers, nonprofits, for-profits across the board, and says we're going to allocate we'd have to go through the numbers of what the right size to start is. You have to get consensus from the trustees, but what is the right size to start a pool? And so we're going to invest this amount of capital, and we want you to come to us with a plan for how much affordable housing you can produce at certain levels. See, I think here's the problem, Barry. This can't be done out of conjunction with the mayor's office, because if they don't have a plan, the Department of City Planning needs to actually plan the city, as opposed to being a place where people are coming at them. They should be going at everyone else and saying, these are the rules. We have this amount of apartments at 30% AMI that are required, this amount of 60, this amount of, and then look at the entire city and say, listen, certain neighborhoods can't get off the hook. They can't say, oh, well, I'm in Soho, I'm here, I'm there. I don't want to have affordable housing because I want to protect, the certain things I don't want to have happen. Everyone's got to be part of the process. And I think it needs to be driven from the city, and key leadership in the city council to say, we as a city have to solve the affordable housing crisis. I think within that conversation, this capital helps to turbocharge it, because quite frankly, $225 billion is a lot of money. I know you can make a decent return out of affordable housing. You just got to do it right. But I would be hard pressed to do that, Barry, without trying to really corral the city and the mayor's office to be really serious about using the Department of City Planning to actually plan.
Right. No, I mean, it would be a complete reimagining of the way things are currently done. And, it makes
And I used to be chair of land use. I used to be chair of land use at Community Board 10. And it was just so frustrating that we're just getting bombarded with these different sort of ULURPs over and over and over again. I go to the Department of City Planning, I go to the mayor's office, and they don't have a plan. So you're just really just responding to all this incoming. It shouldn't be done that way. It should happen the other way around.
I do want to get to a couple of other questions.
Sure.
One is about the tax lien sale. April Tyler had asked about, if you as controller would evaluate the impact of these past tax lien sales on the people behind those properties and the communities in which those properties are located.
No, without question. So I actually have a bill that I will be introducing at the top of the year to ban the public sector from prohibit tax lien sales. I think that the city of New York should get out of the business altogether, number one. But holding that aside for a second, HCFCs, and I know April and others know this all too well. A number of people have lost their ownership, the value in their homes. They've lost it through some of these tax lien sales, and they lost it through other things too with HPD, which is a different type of different conversation. But whenever these third-party investors actually get their hooks in, they want to foreclose. They're not looking to have you pay these tax liens off. They want to burden you forever. And so my view is the controller should have an audit, a programmatic audit, really to assess, under what circumstances. First of all, what are we doing now in its totality? Analyze it fully, and then have a conversation around. Now that we've done that report, let's have a task force and a working group to take that analysis and say, well, we don't want to marginalize people who have invested in communities and who have ownership. We don't want to strip that from them. What are some of the changes and ideas and thoughts that we should be recommending to the mayor and to the city council to change that? Because I think one of the things that I think we need to move from is not just having great ideas and great conversation about what the problem is, but then moving towards identifying recommendations and then take that into advocacy and implementation. I think the controller has to be part of the whole process. And obviously you don't have the authority yourself to do it, but you do have the ability to use, again, 700 staff members, $70 million budget to try to take the conversation from problem identification into implementation, and using the bully put of the controller to really try to drive this stuff home. And so to me, it's a huge problem. Ownership in our community, it's hard to own. There are kids who come back to this community, grew up here, went to college, come back. They can't, a lot of them are still got to go move in with their parents. They can't afford to even rent their own apartments, much less purchase. And when there are those who have purchased, who have been in Harlem and West Harlem, and who have really bled and fought through those rough years, it is not appropriate for now various tricks to take that land from them with gentrification in mind. I'm not here for that. I know none of us are here from that. And I think the controller, you need a controller who understands this issue. And I think you need a controller who understands what it's like to be that minority business that can't get a contract. You're qualified. I went to Brown University, Harvard Business School. One of the, I've done all the right things. I had a partner. We did all the right things. And it was really hard to get contracts, really hard to get opportunities, because it's a system that's set up that does not provide opportunities for those who haven't had it before. I think you need someone with that sort of mindset in the role to sort of really try to help unroot what's going on.
Excellent. And so you've already spoken about MWP contracts, so I'm not going to ask a question on that. But what I do want to ask is, you mentioned the police, and
yes,
before, we talk about performance audits by the controller's office. When you think about the metrics that people use to evaluate the agency, the NYPD were using CompStat for a long time and managed the department to those metrics in ways that may have made those metrics look good, but that completely destroyed the lives of a lot of people who they arrested or stopped and frisked or strung up on charges that were later dropped to make those numbers look good. And so, a lot of people would say that, ACS has is a similar system in that they surveil parents. And if you encounter them, even if you're not doing anything wrong, your life may be thrown completely upside down just to ascertain and prove that you weren't doing anything wrong, and may in fact then get spun out. So how would you use these performance audits and to try to really look at whether or not just whether the agency is meeting its metrics, but whether or not the agency is really benefiting the welfare of New Yorkers?
So let me say the following. I believe a little bit of common sense goes a long way, Barry. One of the things that I think, well, first of all, I just have to say this. Another great example of what you're talking about is district attorney offices, where ADAs measure their success by prosecution, not by getting the right answer, not by fairness. They measured it based on what was your conviction rate? And that is one of the worst tools that can be used. As far as I'm concerned, when I think of ACS, I think of welfare of kids. And for me, the most important question is, how are the children faring? How are they growing? How they're progressing? How are they becoming? How are they in environments that are building them up to be successful and healthy and can live on their own? And for me, the performance audit should be about that. How is the money? Sorry, hold on a second. How is the money that is provided to ACS? How is that helping make these kids' lives better? And what are the right? I'm not the expert on what the best sort of measurements of that should be, but I know what it sounds like and and I think within the question of, like with the police, we want public safety. In this case, we want children's safety. We want children growing, children prospering, and I believe that should be what our audits are centered around. And in a time of COVID, what are some of the different dynamics that creates that makes it difficult, and how we need to invest resources to make sure that there's success. To me, that's the way I would look at it, as opposed to looking at a different kind of way. So, and I'll just go to education for a second real quickly, since we haven't talked about it. In this kind of a scenario, you can measure kids' success based on their attendance records, or you can measure their success based on their learning, how they're thinking, how they, the ability to process, right? Like, we've got to move away from this system of check the box. It's like there's all these different agencies and everyone's checking the box based upon what keeps people employed. We've got to focus on this is city taxpayer dollars that are going towards making the city better. And to me, parents need to be better, kids need to be like, how are the resources we're spending helping to grow the family and grow opportunities for children? That's what I'd want to look to do there.
Excellent. And we are just about edging toward the end of our time here. So I want to give you kind of the opportunity for some closing remarks. Why do you want to be our next New York City Comptroller, and why should we endorse you for it?
Thank you. Well, first of all, West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club, thank you so much. I'm a son of Harlem. I was born in Harlem Hospital. I grew up all over the city, but my life started here. And my mom had me in Harlem with no health insurance. And when I graduated from Harvard Business School, I said, you know what? I want to go back to the community that gave my mom and my life a chance. And it has been an honor to be a volunteer in Harlem. It's been an honor to work with a number of you. I served on my community board. I joined the community board, served for 6 years, became the chair, learned so much and been through so much and love this place as my own. I believe it's time for one of us to sit in the city controller's office again to focus on these core issues that plague all of us, but there's so many similarities. Whether you live in Harlem or you live in Central Brooklyn or South Bronx and communities that have A, people who are marginalized, B, people who are at a range of levels. We have got to have a fair and inclusive system. We have to have a system that's based on common sense. The Comptroller's office is a place where you, A, protect the retirees. I'm the only one with experience to do that directly. And B, you hold the mayor and the city accountable. Our present mayor has not recognized that when you spend $1 billion+ on name the issue, we need results, we need metrics, we need measurements. We need to be able to say, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for providing us with better mental health services, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something that I think the next controller really has to hold the next mayor very accountable on, which is how are we spending resources? What results are we getting for them? And also we need to look at previous spending. We can't every year just say, oh, well, that's what we did last year, let's do it again this year. No, it all has to be reviewed. I'm prepared to do it. I have the background to do it. I have the experience to do it. And I have the will and I have the courage to fight for it.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. It is always a pleasure to have you with us. As I'm sure all of us remember, we were one of the first Democratic clubs to endorse you for the state Senate seat when Senator Perkins became Councilmember Perkins again. And it has been a pleasure having you here tonight again. I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that this is being broadcast on Facebook tonight. It's going to be on our website. And I want to encourage everyone, if you're, one of the hundreds of people apparently who's tuned in on Facebook, I'm so glad that you watched, but also I would really love it if you then passed along that link to your friends, your neighbors, really make sure that they're aware that this race is coming up, that they know that they can get involved right here in their community in determining what the future of New York City, and in this case, what the future of our budget and our city's government's dollars look like in the next year, in this June 2021 primary. As many folks know, we're going to be having our club fundraiser on Zoom in January, and then we'll be having at the very end of January our club's general membership meeting where we'll be voting on our slate of municipal endorsements and the Manhattan DA endorsement 2021. So please, please, please educate yourself, save this and watch it later if you came in halfway, share it with your neighbors, with your friends, with your kids, and let them know that this is a part of the government of the city they live in, and this is what helps determine how their tax dollars are collected and spent, how their economies run. And we really need to make sure now more than ever that same energy that we brought to kicking out that horrible, horrible excuse of a human being in the White House, we bring to making sure that our city survives and thrives and comes back better than before from this pandemic. So thank you, Senator, again for being here. Thank you to Assemblymember Weprin, Senator Parker, Councilmember Lander, Senator Benjamin again, and I will turn it over to our indomitable, unstoppable President Lois Penny.
Thank you.
Hi. I'd like to thank all of y'all for coming. I appreciate you taking the time to address the issues that impact our community. It's very important to me and to the club that the people in the community get an opportunity to know who they're voting for, which is why we do the Zoom and which is why we do the Facebook. The more people that are aware, they can make the proper and informed decisions as to which candidate is who's gonna best represent this community. as a 40-year resident of this community, I have found over the years that we have been neglected, and it's a fight to get anything done or any services from the city. So it's very important as a community that the people that are elected to office also take into consideration the needs of this community. So I appreciate all of y'all coming and participating in the forum.
Have a good night, everyone. Stay safe, be well, have a happy new year.